Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you guys how to make chicken bone broth. The way I make it, it's just so simple. You literally just put everything in the crock pot and you forget it. You don't need any fancy equipment and stuff that you probably have already in the house. I also love that this recipe uses food that would ordinarily be discarded, and such a good way to use food and save money and then also reduce waste. So what I like to do is I like to fill up a big Ziploc bag full of chicken scraps. So let's say I'm cooking a whole chicken, or if we're having chicken thighs or anything like that, I'll take out the bones first. We'll remove the meat from the bones, put those aside, and then have our chicken. And then I just like to have a bag full of bones. I have some chicken thigh bones here, some chicken wings, the spine of the chicken. It usually comes up to about like 2 to 3 full chickens worth of bones. And so I kind of accumulate them until my bag is full, and then I'm ready to make broth. I do the same with veggie scraps. So I'll fill up this bag. In this case, I didn't get a chance to fill up the whole bag. I'm gonna be supplementing. So in here I have some onions and carrots and a little bit of celery that when I'm cooking, I just use like some of the pieces that I'm not really wanting to use for that recipe. I'll put it in the freezer bag because it just kind of all boils away and disintegrates anyway, so it doesn't matter if it's the most appealing or presentable piece of vegetable. Usually the vegetables I like to use are onions, carrots, celery. I'll put some peppercorns in there, and then you can add what other herbs you want. So you can be adding some parsley if you want. Rosemary would be nice for some thyme. I've even done sage, so that part is really up to you what your taste preference is. And so I love how forgiving this recipe is. As long as you have a good ratio of veggies to chicken and to water, it's hard to fail this recipe. I have my slow cooker here, and I will start showing you how I go about doing it. So I have my chicken bones here. A great addition would be also to put chicken feed. If you can find those at the farmer's market or at the grocery store, there's a lot of collagen in those. Don't be freaked out by them. I know they look a little creepy, and I feel like in Canada or in the US, we're not really used to using them or eating them, but they're a great source of collagen. And so if you happen to come across those are a great addition to put into your bone broth. So I'm just gonna put all these bones in here. And then I'll just rewash this and reuse it. It takes a couple of minutes, and then I'm not throwing anything out and creating more waste. And then I will add my veggies. So again, I have the carrots and the onions. I'll put that aside too, because I didn't have that much onion in this bag. I have half an onion that I had in my fridge that I used up yesterday, and I didn't need the whole onion, so I'm adding that in as well. I might just give it just a chop just down the middle, just so it takes up less space. And then I have some celery here that I've chopped up as well, and that's about maybe 3 or 4 stalks worth. So I'm gonna put that in. You also want to add in some peppercorns, some whole peppercorns. I know it helps with the absorption of the nutrients in the bone broth. So I'm adding those in, and then you want to put 1 or 2 tablespoons of salt. I'm using fine sea salt here. So 1 and 2. And it's also recommended that you put some kind of acid in your bone broth. That way it helps extract the collagen from the bones. You could use apple cider vinegar. I feel like is the most common one. I've seen some other people use like a liqueur or like a vermouth because they don't like the taste of vinegar, but that's up to you. Don't make the mistake that I made and put lemons in your bone broth. I did that once, and the peels just made the whole broth taste really bitter, so don't do that. That's an acid, but you don't want to put lemon in here. So I'm going to put 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. Oops. go. And then I have a large jug of filtered water here, and then I'm gonna just simply add that all in to the crock pot. And I'm gonna really press that in. The amount of water you're gonna put really depends on how much chicken you're using and how full your crock pot is. You want to use the right ratio, again, water to chicken, just because if you put too much water, you run the risk of having a runny bone broth, so you won't get that gelatinous bone broth that you're looking at the end. So be cognizant of that. Just make sure all your ingredients are just covered enough water. The other thing I forgot to add was a couple of bay leaves. That adds to the flavor of the broth. And then I'm going to sprinkle on a little bit of thyme. Don't go crazy because this will be cooking for a while, and so you don't want it to become overly bitter if you're putting too many herbs. So just a little bit of rosemary and a little bit of thyme. That's what I'm adding today. And you can kind of just push everything in, make sure it's nicely incorporated. You can also add a couple of garlic cloves if you want. I just have 2 little ones here. Again, because this is boiling for so long, you don't want to put aromatics that are too strong and are going to overpower the broth. Some people add this afterwards towards the end of the cooking process, but they're pretty small and I love garlic, so I'm just going to plop those in as well. And so I'm just going to press everything in, make sure it's nicely incorporated. And then the other thing to think about is how long you're going to cook your broth for. Some people say that 3 to 6 hours is more than enough for chicken broth. I do find that you need a little bit longer if you're really going to extract all the benefits, all the nutrients from the bones. So I feel like 12 hours is a good spot. So you want to make sure your broth is not boiling the whole time though, for the 12 hours. So what you're going to do is you're going to put it on high for about an hour until that first boil starts to happen, and then you're going to lower it, and then you have to kind of see some crock pots. You can just put it on low, and that will be just enough for a slow simmer. So you just want to see a bubble here and there once every few seconds, so not a rolling boil. The reason for that being is if you're boiling it for too high for too long, a lot of people call it breaking the collagen, so you won't get that gelatinous bone broth that you're looking for. It'll be more runny. You'll still have a lot of nutrients in there, but if you're looking for that strong collagen content, then you want to make sure you don't overboil it for too long. The ideal temperature is 185 degrees Fahrenheit. What you can do is either check it with a thermometer every once in a while, and then once you have done it a couple times, you know that you should be putting, after that first initial boil, you're either going to put it on warm or on low for the next 11 hours. At this stage, you've added all your ingredients, all your chicken, your herbs, your peppercorns, your vinegar. You've added all in, so you're going to go ahead and cover it, lock it in, and put it on high for an hour or until you see it start to boil, and then you're going to lower the heat and look for that simmer for the next 11 hours. So I'm gonna just plug this in, and I'll see you guys in about an hour when this is boiling, so you guys can see what it looks like. It's now been 12 hours, it's the next day, and let's see how our stock is doing. It's got a beautiful coloring, and I'm gonna go ahead and strain all of this out into a separate bowl. I have a large bowl here, and I'm just gonna go ahead and scoop all the big pieces out. Trying to show you how you don't need any fancy equipment to make bone broth. You can just use what you have around the house. So I'm just using a slotted spoon where I can lift the bones and the veggies and put them in a bowl. And some people use like a strainer that's on a handle, so it's a little bit wider and it catches more. But again, if you don't have that, then you don't need to use that. So you can just use what you have at home, which is amazing. And you get all the health benefits, and you don't need to go and get extra items that you don't need. Some people at this point also choose to reuse the bones, so they'll go through the same process again, pick up the bones. I haven't done it personally, so I'm not sure how well that would work. If I'm going to go through the hassle of making another batch, I prefer to get fresh bones and fresh veggies and go from there. You see, we've removed all the large chunks. There's nothing really big that's left in the broth. This is everything that we had in the slow cooker. But you see it's not a clear liquid. So we want to get this as clear as possible so it's a nice smooth finish. So I'm going to go ahead and strain that with a cheesecloth right now. I'm going to be reusing the same bowl to strain my liquid into. So before I discard the bones and the veggies, just look how much liquid was actually at the bottom of the bowl. So you just make sure to pour that back in to be able to strain it. That way that nothing goes to waste. And I am curious to see if anybody has reused the bones and how they like doing that, or versus if they don't like doing that. Please leave a comment down below and tell me if you've had success with boiling your bones a second time. I've got my clean bowl here and I've got a strainer, and I'm also gonna put some cheesecloth over it, and then that really catches the smaller pieces. So I've placed it over one corner here, and then as this starts to get clogged up, I will start to pull it. I would just kind of roll it and use like the cleaner part, because this, with all the herbs and the different elements of the chicken that have been disintegrated or have boiled into the liquid, they start to clog up and it's hard to strain everything. So just, that's a nice little tip. Just start at one end and then you can use the rest of the cheesecloth. Just be gentle here. So I'm kind of just moving the liquid around, swishing it around to help it strain through. So you kind of see all the debris that's forming on the edge here. That is what makes the cheesecloth not strain as properly or as easily. So I'm just kind of helping it along, and then once that's done, I will roll this up and use a different part of the cheesecloth. So this is what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna move it to the side a little bit and use this part, and that's it. Simple as that. And my bowl's getting pretty full, so I'm just gonna lift it so the liquid has somewhere to go. I'm just gonna turn it so you guys can see a little bit. So this is what you're left with afterwards. I could probably pass it through the cheesecloth one more time, but I'm okay with this. There's a little bit of the rosemary and the thyme in the broth, but I'm okay with that. I'm not really gonna be drinking it. I usually just use it for cooking or soup, or to make rice, so I'm okay with how clear this is. But if you can see that there's a little bit of fat on the top, some people are okay with leaving the fat on and just refrigerating and freezing the broth as is. I prefer to remove it, and that way I can control how much butter or olive oil or fat I'm gonna be adding into my food. One thing to note is that chicken bone broth will have a lot less fat content than beef, so you're not gonna see that big, thick fat that separates or when it cools down as you would with beef broth. And so it'll just be a thin layer at the top. So what I'm gonna do is, this has cooled down already a little bit. It's still warm, but it's not really, really hot. It's been cooling for an hour or so. And so I'm gonna put it into the fridge. I'm gonna let it cool a little bit more in the fridge for another few hours until I see that fat separating from the broth underneath. This is what the broth looks like after it's cooled. So you see the lighter color here, that's the fat. So it's very minimal. It's not as much as you would expect. I'm gonna try and discard most of the fat into a glass. And you'll notice that the top here is liquidy, but underneath, look at this gel. This is full of collagen, full of rich collagen that you can use and get the benefits in your cooking, when you're sipping. All of this is rich, beautiful collagen. And because I'd like for you to be able to make this without needing to purchase anything special, any special equipment or anything extra, I'm showing you that you don't need any fancy mason jars to bottle the broth afterwards. You just need some jars, some glass jars that you've saved. And so I have a good collection of these jars in my pantry, and that's what I'm going to be using today. So I've washed these really well. and sanitize them, so you can boil them in hot water, which sanitizes them, and leave them to air dry. And so I know that these hold about just under 2 cups. And so that's really valuable to know before you put your broth in a jar and freeze it. You want to know how much is in each jar, so that way when you're defrosting it, you know you're defrosting the right amount that you need, and then you're not defrosting too much and not using it up. So if you have jars that are different sizes, you can easily take a measuring cup and pour some water into it and just kind of measure out and see how much each jar fits. And then with a little label or tape, you can mark with a Sharpie and say, this is 2 cups, this is 3 cups. And then that way you know, and you can label each jar before you fill it up. So that's a nice little tip. So I'm gonna just simply go ahead and put this into my jars. So simple as that. I do find the broth continues to gel as time progresses, so as time goes on and it cools down even more. So if you really wanted to make it a little bit easier, you could technically just do this straight after you've made your broth and put it straight into jars. And if you're not really worried about cooling it down and removing the fat, then that's an option too, just doing straight, and then you can pour it into a funnel and pour it right into your jars. I know that these jars are just under 2 cups, but I also want to leave a space at the top because when liquids freeze, they expand. So make sure you leave some room in your jar to allow for that expansion when you're putting it into the freezer. And I'm gonna go afterwards and clean these up with a nice clean rag. And this bone broth can be used in so many ways. Look at that gel, look how awesome that is. This makes me really happy to see this. And so you can use this broth in so many different ways. I like to use it instead of water to make rice or quinoa, which adds a lot of protein into the rice. Of course, making soups. There's so many, anywhere really that if you're making a savory dish and it calls for water or some kind of stock or broth, this would be your go-to. This is what you would put in there. And then you're upping the protein factor of your recipe. You're adding so many more minerals and benefits into that as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and fill these up, leaving some room at the top to allow it for the freezing. And that's how you make bone broth, chicken bone broth. This is the end result. You have delicious, healthy, collagen-rich, protein-rich bone broth, and so it's so easy to make. As you've seen, you don't need any fancy equipment, stuff that you have inside the house. So this one batch made me about 10 cups of bone broth, and so I'm gonna pop these into the freezer, and then I'll have them for the next few weeks to use in my kitchen, in my cooking. One thing I wanted to add is some people might wonder if you need to roast your bones before using them, or if you can just use raw bones for your chicken bone broth. And the answer is, it really depends up to you. I prefer having cooked bones or roasted bones because it adds a depth of flavor to your broth, and it also makes the color a little bit richer too. I personally prefer to roast the bones beforehand, but also that comes into play because I'm using leftover bones that I've cooked with already. So we're using the meat, we're eating the meat, and then putting the bones aside to use them for the broth making. So it's not a separate step for me. It's easy to just use what I have. I'm cooking anyway, so I might as well just save the bones afterwards. I really hope you give this broth a try and see how simple it is for yourself and benefit from all the health benefits from it as well. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. I would love for you to subscribe and join our little community. I post new videos every Friday on general homemaking tips, recipes the whole family will love, cleaning motivation, and just trying to make life as beautiful as possible. So I would love to see you guys next week.